and welcome to another episode of Escaping the Cult with yours truly, Zoe Smith. We have a really interesting topic. It's going to be about circumcision. Extremely taboo, so of course, I have to talk about it. You might have heard me talking about it a little bit if you go back and you watch the Unjected reunion. I was speaking with a couple people that are on the Unjected show about this particular topic, and it really highlighted why we need to talk about circumcision. That there's a lot of taboo that we need to cover. And before I bring my special guest on to talk about that today, I just wanted to remind you guys that the website is currently down. However, I am working on getting a payment processor right now. I just applied for one, so wish me luck. And then the website will go up one way or the other, even if I have to have alternative payment processing or I have to have it just on eBay. Then there will still be a way to get both the print book and the audiobook, which just came out in September. Until then, I know you can't really see me when I have this up here, but this is the manual order form. You can find this on my Substack. You can find this on my Twitter, which is Zowe, Zowe _TKMC for Thrill Kill Medical Cult. And you can manually order the book on this form. You just print it out and send it to the address that's listed. You can pay with cash. You can pay with gold. You can pay with silver. And you can get either the audiobook or the print book or the signed copy if you like. So that is still one way that you can support me. The other way is you can go to zowe.substack.com. That's where all my stuff is still up right now. I am going to be doing another episode on the publishing racket, and part of that is going to be covering Substack. So in my last podcast, I mentioned my days on Substack might be numbered because Stripe is the money changer for Substack. Stripe continues to pay me for my Substack for now, but we've gone round and around, and Stripe and I are not friends. So I don't know how long that relationship will last. Not to mention Substack is being globalist compliant and doing age checks in Australia, and I'm sure the UK with their digital ID is affected by that as well. So definitely feeling like my days on Substack are numbered. But for now, it is a good way to support me because they are still sending me money, and you can get not only this podcast, but you can get the book in different chapters with the audio release on there. So for $5 a month, it's for paid subscribers only to get the book. That is another way to get the book if you're interested. And now I would like to introduce the topic to today. And I'm going to introduce it to you the same way that I was introduced to my guest, which is you may have seen me in my notes section and different media platforms on Halloween. This was my Halloween costume. And I was trying to get across the message that the scariest thing that you could possibly be is somebody in a white coat with a needle. And unfortunately, the message did not get across. I had to actually explain my costume to people. In this costume, I call myself Nurse Jabby. And obviously, you see I have like a fake needle there. And you can see the blood on me. And I look dead. I have a little noose around my neck. So my backstory there was that I was hung by the townspeople for vaccinating the townspeople. And they started to put it together. So they hung me. That was the backstory there. But I found my next guest. You might notice a similarity in this picture. This is actually from a group called Bloodstained Men, and they obviously have a problem with circumcision. You'll notice the blood on the picture there. And so we're going to be getting into why that is. Why are they upset? Why are they protesting? And what is really going on with the missing foreskin? Because it's never just the tip. And on that note, welcome, Jeff. Can you introduce yourself to my audience, so they know a little bit about you and what brought you to talking about circumcision publicly? Because I know it's not an easy topic to talk about, but you and I have both talked in private about how important it is. So can you kind of introduce my audience to yourself and the topic?
Sure. So yeah, I've been doing circumcision harm research for about a year now. I actually got into this subject because I started foreskin restoration, which is a practice of prolonged tensioning and stretching of the remnant skin to create a new foreskin and to regain some coverage. And as I was having success with that, I started feeling emotions of grief and sorrow from what was taken from me, and realized that this does have functional benefits such as protection, sensitivity, mobile gliding action. And I went through a obsessive epiphany phase where I dove into all the research I could find, trying to understand why this is going on and how it harms us. So I produced a documentary. It took me a couple hundred hours, but I'm very proud of it, and it has a lot of really good information. There's actually a Netflix documentary called American Circumcision, and that's another really good one to watch as well. But basically, this is an ancient blood sacrifice that is disguised as a medical procedure. And there's been a lot of fraudulent medical claims of health benefits of circumcision over the last couple hundred years. But before that, it was well known to be a tribal ritual. And so I'd like to address that first, and let's look back on how this got adopted into American hospitals. So the Rockefeller medical establishment took root in the late 1800s, and he had Abraham Flexner go around from state to state to basically disenfranchise natural healers and natural medicine. And there was a number of other Jewish doctors who started the pediatric academies, such as Abraham Jacobi and M.J. Moses. And they claimed Jewish boys were immune from diseases like epilepsy, seizures, night sweats, and such things like that because they were circumcised. So they advocated for circumcision as a health measure. And a lot of people are familiar with Kellogg, the cereal inventor. He claimed that circumcision should be done as a punishment to stop masturbation. And he also advocated for female genital mutilation as well.
Right. And I actually have a little clip of a quote from what this man said, the Kellogg man, J.H. Kellogg. And I looked up the history of the Kellogg's for the research for my book, which is right now on Substack. Chapter 6 is the one where I mentioned the connection to eugenics in healthcare, that healthcare is based in eugenics. Kellogg was a big eugenicist. Mm-hmm. And ironically enough, his family was huge. And I couldn't even figure out from J.H. Kellogg if it was that Kellogg or some, I guess he had like 13 children and each of them had a big family and they all spread out all across the US. Well, one of the Kellogg's ended up in the same town as my pioneer ancestors. And there is even a tiny little town called Kellogg. And not only are they famous for cereal, but check this out.
The remedy for masturbation, which is almost always successful in small boys, is circumcision. The operation should be performed without administering an anesthetic, as the brief pain attending the operation will have the salutary effect upon the mind, especially if it be connected with the idea of punishment.
Just that is so barbaric and inhumane to do to an infant. Can you talk about why they don't use anesthesia for the procedure? Because that just sounds completely insane to me.
Well, first of all, infants cannot tolerate general anesthesia, so they cannot be put to sleep for operations. In recent times, they can be numbed with like a penal block, like a local injection. But studies have found that it's usually not even used because, one, it takes extra time, and two, it costs extra money. So a lot of circumcisers at the hospitals line up the babies in a assembly line fashion and just go to town and don't bother with injecting the nerve block. And you've got to remember, this is a 6,000-year-old procedure. So the vast majority of babies are not numbed at all. And yeah, it's just absolutely sickening. And if anybody's ever seen it or seen a video of it, it's worse than any horror movie you could imagine, except the horror movies are fictional and this is real, taking place daily.
I do have to say, Jeff has graciously allowed me permission to show the documentary on my channel. So once this airs, a little while after, maybe at the same time or a couple days later, I'll release the documentary. And I am going to have a little disclaimer about the procedure. I'm going to put it at the beginning, and I'm going to put it right before the procedure starts, so you can look away and plug your ears, because I'm very desensitized. I have seen surgeries. I'm okay with blood. I've worked in a hospital. It was my job to look at like wound care pictures, which are really grotesque. And I thought I was desensitized, but I cringed. I literally was brought to tears when I saw the procedure. And I do think people need to understand how horrific it is, because I'm not a parent, but if I were to have seen that before I would have a child, there's no way I would do that to my son. Yep. Or my pet.
Right. Exactly.
And it's one more point before we move through the slides. I wanted to, so this guy, Kellogg and Abram also, so these are like the founders of Western medicine, basically, how we're practicing. And we have heard throughout my life, and I'm sure with the LGBTQ, like it's starting to come back into public consciousness, that in Africa, there are some tribes that practice things like label cutting or genital mutilation of females, maybe in some Muslim countries as well, to prevent sexual arousal because they think women can't control themselves or whatever. And that's like a rite of passage for some tribes. And us in America, at least, we see that and frame that as genital mutilation. And we have people protesting and saying that's awful and barbaric and you shouldn't be doing that to people. However, we basically do that here in our own country to half of the population that just happens to be male.
Right. Yep.
Without even thinking about it. So it's not something that happens over there to some other group. It's actually right here, right at home.
Yeah, exactly. One last thing, Abraham Wolbars, he wrote a paper called Universal Circumcision as a Sanitary Measure in 1914. And it basically suggested compulsory circumcision of infants in the hospital, even against parental consent. And he's another Abrahamic cult member. And what's really ironic about these Abrahamic cult members is none of them have any experience with foreskin. They were circumcised as 8-day-old infants. So they will spend their life coming up with reasons to justify what was done to them. And they would rather pass on the trauma than to confront it themselves. And this is exactly why cut men who become fathers circumcise their sons.
Wow.
Yep. It's ignorance, but also chosen ignorance. It's almost impossible for men to face this, and it takes a lot of courage.
Yeah. I've definitely heard the rumors about the cleanliness argument, and that's typically what I hear from men that are circumcised, is they feel better because they're more clean than the intact counterparts. And I think it's just because the societal culture, at least in America, is very much geared toward circumcision. And if you take it away from the taboo topic we're on and just apply it to like anything else, you see the same pattern play out. So like if someone was asked to do something, like let's just say when you go to medical school, you have to go for 8 years. And one of the things they do, and I have a friend who went to medical school and she told me that this was still the practice, they kind of intentionally put you through like this hazing process where they make you work really, really long hours on almost no sleep. And they say that, that's part of it. And the whole, like the rigorous pace of school, how it's almost impossible to keep up with and get good grades. So there's like ridiculous pressure put on them while they're in school to learn and do well during this process. It's very much like a hazing process. And at one point, my friend even was like brought to tears by the amount of verbal abuse that she suffered at the hands of, it was actually it was a cardiologist, I believe. I was going to say, I thought it was on her OBGYN rotation, but no, it was a cardiologist. And she defended that physician for speaking down to her as if she was not human, because she justified that he has worked that hard. So he's gone through all of these steps. He's passed the hazing, and therefore it is now his right to treat other people as less than him because he's passed through this hazing. And so it's kind of the same societal pattern, just with a different procedure. So it's like, if whatever I went through, that was okay, and I'm going to make other people do that because that's the way we do things. It's the mentality.
Yeah, it's trauma-based mind control. Exactly. All right, so here is Andrew Friedman. He was one of the Circ policy directors in the now famous 2012 circumcision policy report, where they basically recommended circumcision for infants. And I say basically because it wasn't explicit, but it was allowable, and it was all a big insurance racket. Basically, the CDC and the AAP colluded to produce this report in order to get insurance coverage for neonatal circumcisions. And they created their own market, and now it's a $4 or $5 billion market. But the director here, Andrew Friedman, he admitted that it's not a medical procedure. Recently, in a 2025 Journal of Medical Ethics article, he said it's not really a medical practice. It's only a medical procedure in the sense that medical professionals are the ones performing it. And he actually defines it as a tribal custom. He's famous for circumcising his son on his kitchen table.
And we have a clip of this POS. Let's take a look.
He's on the record for saying, as a practicing pediatric urologist, 20% of the patients I will see today are here because of something related to their circumcision. So he knows that these have a very high complication and injury rate, and yet he does it to his own son on his parents' kitchen table. He says, I did it for religious reasons, not medical. I did it because I have 3,000 years of ancestors looking over my shoulder.
In my practice, I like to sort of define it as a tribal custom. And if you belong to a tribe that does it, then you really want it. And you can define tribe however you want. Now keep in mind, this is not a universally accepted standard. This is roundly condemned by the intactivists, who feel that the overriding ethical concern is the right to bodily integrity, and no one should be able to alter your body without your consent. To me, that's actually the more interesting controversy or reason topic for discussion. And we have to decide as a society, what are our ethical standards?
How much do you want to bet that guy is circumcised?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's just perpetuating the cycle further and justifying it under the guise of, it's my religious right to do this to my own son without his consent. And yet this guy This is what I'm constantly laughing about: the AMA, the CDC, talking about medical ethics. They have no ethics. It's all based in money.
Yep. Control, money, shadow agendas. Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's really upsetting about their report is that their recommendation did not agree with the rest of their report. If anybody read it's like a 20-page document, you would find that the risks overwhelmingly outweigh any benefit. The largest benefit they found was less than a 1% reduction in UTIs. But they mislead the public because they report relative risk reduction. So they can claim a 90% reduction. But because UTIs of boys are so rare, that the absolute risk reduction is still less than 1%.
Well, and isn't that the same numbers game that they played with the effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccine? Oh, it's 95% effective and you won't get hospital. And we all know that that's BS. So it's the same kind of BS. And you make a very good point in your documentary that females just biologically are more likely to get urinary tract infections. The opening's bigger. There's other stuff closer to it. It's just more prone to UTIs. We don't cut stuff off. We give them antibiotics.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And the smegma thing, the hygiene argument, it's a myth. It's not clean or hygienic to have an open, bloody wound in a dirty diaper. And this is why infection rates of circumcision are anywhere from 2 to 10%.
That's definitely not something we talk about in the medical coding world. I don't know about the rest of the healthcare world, but I really haven't heard it talked about or mentioned really at all. So it seems to me like it's taboo even inside the cult, which is pretty telling right there. Anything you can't question, it's pretty telling.
The most common side effect of circumcision is actually something called medial stenosis. And that is where the exit of their urethra starts to scar and close down, creating a stricture. And this is because the internal organ of the glands has now been externalized and is being abraded by clothing. And so over time, this urethral opening actually gets smaller, and it happens in up to 20% of circumcisions. And I believe that's what Andrew Friedman is talking about, that 20% of his patients are there for circumcision complications. Mine actually got so bad that as a 20-year-old college student, I had to go to the urology clinic and have them widen it with scissors. So talk about trauma. I mean,
yeah, and you can remember that one.
Yeah, exactly. So that's pretty shocking. But the whole report, and like you said, just like with the vaccines, they exaggerate risk reduction of rare disease. They minimize risk. They ignore bodily function and totally exclude all real world evidence.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of is my specialty, going through scientific papers and debunking them, because it's not even so much about it. That's a big part of it. People who fund the studies want the results to support their agenda. That's part of it. But it's also not questioning the dogma, which is why I call it a cult. And it seems like you can't question circumcision because that's built into the dogma. There's a racket behind it and everything. Let's move on with our little slideshow here, because I think you have more.
All right. So this is an interesting study that reveals why most victims of genital cutting, including women in female genital mutilation, why both of them claim that they're fine. And the reason why is because they hold inaccurate beliefs about the unaltered genitalia, and they are unaware of the consequences to sexual intercourse due to the alterations.
I honestly didn't know until maybe the last couple years or so. I started looking into it, And even when if anyone cares to, you want to go and watch the Unjected reunion, we talked about this a little bit. And the men on that show also were not aware of some of this. And Zach in particular was really interested when I had looked this up, and I found that apparently there's a major loss of sensation when you lose the foreskin. And it also, I guess, cuts out the part that helps with lubrication. So it's not just the female's biological function to produce lubrication. Males also produce lubrication, which I didn't even know. They didn't know that either. And they started to get really curious when I said, apparently, when men are intact, they have full sensation and it's more pleasurable for both partners. And that really got their attention.
Yeah. Yeah. And the lubrication part is interesting because there's a really bad stigma around smegma. And smegma is actually healthy. It's antibacterial, it's antiviral. It helps keep a moist mucosal organ healthy and lubricated. And women produce a lot more smegma. So that is not a hygiene concern. Simply wash it in the shower and everything will be fine. Soap is not even needed. In fact, soap can disrupt the natural pH balance.
And that's the same for females as well. You're not supposed to actually use soap.
Right. And I should also mention here that as an adolescent and child, the foreskin is fused to the glands. So there's nothing to clean. There's nothing to pull back and clean out. It's totally protected. It's sealed. The foreskin doesn't start to retract until puberty. So it's really not a concern as far as hygiene of children.
Which is crazy because I didn't even know that. I mean, and I wonder how many new moms think that they're going to have to do this if they don't circumcise and don't even know about the real anatomy.
Right. Actually, about 60 years ago, there was a Jewish eugenics leader. His name was Guttmacher, and he published an article in the 1941 Parents magazine, and he made false claims about intact anatomy. He tried to scare parents that they would have to pull back the foreskin and scrub under it daily for their babies if they kept them intact, which is extremely harmful. Never, ever forcibly retract. But that's still a problem in some pediatric practices that they do to children. And that does cause a lot of problems.
Crazy.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about some of the functions, because I think there's a lot to learn here. I know from your documentary, I learned a lot from this section. I honestly didn't know that a lot of this even existed. So I'm sure people will be interested to learn as well.
Yeah, so it turns out that the foreskin has the 5 most sensitive structures of the penis. And the AAP and other medical organizations have falsely claimed that there's no sensitivity difference, there's no difference in sexual pleasure. And the reason they make that claim is because they are comparing the glands of the circumcised and intact penis. But the glands is among the least sensitive. So as you can see in this diagram, the glands is the yellow color, least sensitive. The highest sensitivity is the purple and the red. So those 5 structures are the inner and the outer foreskin, the frenulum, the orifice rim, and the ridged band. And this compromises about 50% of the tissue and about 75% of the sensitivity and over a dozen functions. So it's very, very important for sexual anatomy.
Wait. 75% reduced sensation.
Circumcision removes 75% of the sensitivity. Yep.
Wow. That is incredible.
Oh, yeah, it's horrific. To add insult to injury, the most sensitive part of the circumcised penis is the underside of the scar line.
Yep. That checks out.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrific. People, obviously, they're not inclined to learn about this, but we need to have a cultural revolution of appreciating the natural body, appreciating the natural functions. Um, it would have prevented a lot of the problem that we're in today. But some of the functions that I'd like to mention are mobile gliding action, and the vaginal wall has ridges that accommodate the foreskin while the member thrusts within its own skin tube, making the biological act of love a gentle, friction-free experience. So it's very important for both male and female.
Yeah, I just want to point out there that females are in society are basically told medically and socially that their responsibility during sex is basically to produce the lubrication. And if you don't, there's something wrong with you. Well, apparently that is supposed to be a shared function, ladies. That's supposed to be a shared function. So yeah, I'm sure there's women out there feeling some sort of shame or that they have to use a ridiculous amount of lube in order to make things work. There may be more reason to that than you're aware of.
Exactly. And also, the circumcised penis removes lubrication from the vaginal canal because the head scoops it out, whereas the intact male's foreskin provides a gasket around the opening, so all the lubrication stays inside.
Just absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
One of my girlfriends, you have one of the functions you mentioned is estrogen receptors. And I see there's one other part in there that looks like it might have something to do with this. And in your documentary, there's a woman who speaks about the baby is, when your baby is born, it is perfect. Just like when we're talking about babies don't need 72 vaccines in order to be healthy. I believe after going down this rabbit hole that males don't need to be circumcised, that they're perfect as they are. Yep. As they come out of their mother, they're perfectly formed. They don't need this procedure. And one of the things that my friend brought up, and I thought, how is this possible? But until I saw this documentary, I guess that answer hadn't come. But I think this is part of the answer. She said that men and women for a long time were like biologically wired to be together for life. And I'm looking at today's society and we have like major amounts of divorce and relationship dysfunction. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that can't possibly be. Humans aren't wired to be together for life. Life changes and you change so much through life that there's no way that we could be biologically wired to be together for life. And she said, no, it actually has to do with sex and basically having sex at like a younger age. And something about like there is this hormone pheromone bond. So it's not just like a physical thing. It's not just emotional. There's actually a chemical bond, kind of like when a baby nurses from the mother, it creates that oxytocin hormone, which is a bonding hormone. Same hormone that is created during sex. Oxytocin. That's why it's kind of a high that people want to, go for because they want that pair bond. Right. And this right here is saying that it is the foreskin that's removed that has those estrogen receptors. So therefore the pair bond isn't as possible.
That's right. Exactly. So the apocrine glands are responsible for pheromones, and the estrogen receptors are responsible for that biochemical exchange. So yeah, both of those things are huge as far as connection and pair bonding. But another big problem is that most of us with hospital birth trauma have damaged oxytocin receptor sites due to drugs like Pitocin being used in labor. So we have a very dysfunctional society. And a lot of it does come back to birth trauma. And that's how I got interested in this, actually. So, yeah, it's a rabbit hole.
For sure. Is there any other functions we missed that you want to cover before we move on, or should I move to the next one?
Yeah, one interesting that I like to mention is Meissner's corpuscles. And basically, these are in your fingertips, and they're just very, very sensitive nerves that allow you to detect something as small as a human hair. And it turns out these are on the foreskin. So that should give people an idea on just how erogenous this tissue is. So we know that circumcision pain causes brain damage. And Paul Tenari helped create this study where he worked in the epidemiology department of a hospital, and he coordinated with some of the nurses who work there to do a after hours MRI study on the changes to the brain due to the pain of circumcision. So one of the nurses was actually getting bullied by her husband to circumcise their infant. So she volunteered her own son, and they put him into the MRI machine, and they used a obsidian blade to cut him while he was in the machine. Because they couldn't use metal, so they used the obsidian blade. And what they found was that the damage is to the amygdala, the frontal lobe, and the temporal lobe. And this is the area of the brain that is most critical for emotions, for reasoning, for awareness, senses. So this is very, very significant. And instead of getting a Nobel Peace Prize, they threatened to fire Dr. Paul and the nurses if they did not destroy their evidence. So this is pretty shocking. And Dr. Paul actually has a very fascinating story. He's the only one I'm aware of that sued the government for his circumcision and won money. He won $12,000 to get a foreskin reconstruction surgery as an adult. So,
Wow.
yeah, if he's still alive, I want to interview him.
Yeah, that is. I was almost going to say, like, I'm sure with this transhumanist agenda, they're going to come up with some like graphene based tissue replacement, and they'll be like, oh, we have a new surgery for you. It'll cost you, but you'll get your foreskin back. I can almost see that coming.
Yeah. There's actually a pretty big startup called Foragen, and they're doing, I think it's stem cell research, but they're working on recreating the foreskin.
Wow. So
Yes.
they have some awareness of the damage that they've caused, and that there are men that might want to seek to be restored. That's, but the amount of, I'm still stunned and shocked at the brain damage and the lack of ability, or how that impairs the infant's ability to bond with the mother. And later in your documentary, you say that because of this physiological effect of the brain, the adult male is emotionally impaired, cognitively impaired. Their sense of pain is, their pain threshold is like permanently elevated.
Yeah.
And so we basically have half the population wandering around with brain damage.
Yep.
It's not like a mild form of brain damage from infant child trauma.
Right.
And that can, I mean, it seems to me like that might explain the divorce rate and why, like you even said in your documentary, like a cut man will never feel safe in the presence of a woman. And like, I can almost feel that as a woman wandering around this society, that there's a deep distrust towards women. And I've always felt like, how am I going to overcome that? How am I going to win back their trust? And like, from this, like, there's really no way to do it unless there's some way to like go back and actually deal with the trauma somehow and process through it. So at least to have an awareness of like that's something that has happened, which it seems like you've gone down that path, but I would dare that most men haven't even considered this to begin to process that trauma.
It's very hard to even access it because we had to bury it and disassociate to survive. So not only is it hard to access, but it's very, very painful. But it is a mother wound. Babies are very aware. They can't speak English, but they're very conscious. They're very aware. and they know that they were betrayed by their mother. They depend on their mother throughout all of their infancy for nurturing, for protection. And so this feminine wound they will carry into all of their intimate relationships. And it does cause problems of insecurity, betrayal, sensation seeking, emotional instability. And we have the science to show this. I think my next slide has it. So the early adverse experience leads to abnormal brain development. It's characterized by increased anxiety, altered pain sensitivity, stress disorders, hyperactive disorders, impaired social skills, and patterns of self-destructive behavior. It also is found to increase the risk of autism by double. So they have 50% more likely chance to have diagnosis of autism. So the brain damage is very, very significant.
That is so incredible. And
Yes.
it's kind of like phantom limb
Right.
experience, like if it's an arm or a finger or something, that there have been studies on that to find that people can still, like, that neurological pathway, that your brain responding to the pain of the limb or even the amputation procedure is still response. So, like, the brain still thinks that there's a limb there. It's still trying to move the limb. And it seems like this is kind of a very similar concept.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people are willing to accept that abusing their dogs or abusing animals can cause altered emotions and altered behavior. But for some reason, they haven't connected the dots that strapping down a baby to a crucifix and violently amputating his most sensitive anatomy won't cause problems. So, yeah, we have I think it's like a cultural amnesia where it's like a feigned ignorance, like we're choosing to look away from this. But times are changing, consciousness is raising, and people are becoming aware. The infant circumcision rate is down under 50% now. And only a few decades ago, it was near 100%. So things are going in the right direction. But we've got to have an open heart and open minds to learn about this.
Yeah, that is incredible. Let's look at the next slide and talk a little bit more about the brain damage, I guess, that occurs.
Yeah, so I started thinking of circumcision as a sexual lobotomy, but then I realized it's a lobotomy of the brain as well. It targets the exact same part of the brain that a lobotomy does. The frontal lobe, reasoning, thinking, behavior, emotions. So the lobotomy is actually still legal. You can still do it, but they were cognizant enough to admit the harm and stop recommending it. And now they do pharmaceutical lobotomies, so they just medicate everybody. But
Yeah.
The parallels are still there, though.
At one hospital I was working at, it was the one where I actually worked in person as a coder. And one day I was outside walking along the sidewalk on the campus, and a car pulled up to me. They were looking for an appointment, and a woman rolled down the window and she said, "I'm here for a lobotomy. Can you point me to wherever?" And I was just like, oh my God, they actually do that still?
Wow. I wonder if she was joking with you or if she was serious.
No, I think she was serious. She seemed very like she had been lobotomized already. Yeah. Definitely didn't have like the same emotional range that other people did. And she was in the car with another person, and that I think was probably her daughter. And it seemed like, they were both on the same page, like, well, we're here to get help.
Yeah.
Because, they're told that they're crazy and this is the only way you're going to fix it. And
Right.
So they're under the impression that it will help them.
Yeah. And that symptom that you noticed in her, the lack of emotion, it's called alexithymia, and it happens to circumcision victims as well. and it's characterized by a difficulty in feeling and expressing emotions. And I think a lot of people have this.
Yeah.
Yeah. But like you said, the relationship difficulties, women want their men to be able to connect emotionally, and the men just don't have that ability. That part of their brain has been lobotomized.
I honestly think that's why there's a huge societal move toward what I would call like the beta male, or what you call the sneaky fucker strategy, which is basically the feminized male feigning the emotional connection for the female, which in nature, it's typically like an alpha type that the female would be with. However, the beta males in any species, and I'm a zoologist, so I've studied this, the beta males, and you'll even notice this on, for example, seal beaches. Like the beach masters will be like, the big, heavy males, and you can tell that they're going to beat up all the other inferior males, essentially. And so the only way that those other males are going to get breeding rights or sexual access is if they sneak in when the beach master isn't looking. And that's essentially like what I'm seeing throughout all of American society is this trend toward that strategy rather than the alpha male. And there's a huge awareness now that, not that I, have any feelings one way or the other, it's just like patterns that I've noticed. But it definitely seems like society is starting to maybe move toward favoring alpha males a little bit more, like getting away from the idea of this toxic male. But I think the idea of that came out of this.
Yeah, that's interesting. It could have a correlation with the administration in charge, the conservative movement. But there's a lot of dysfunction in relationships and masculinity. And it makes sense. I mean, how can a man be masculine when his manhood has been removed?
Yeah. Wasn't that the practice of making eunuchs before?
Right. Exactly. So masculinity, in my opinion, is about presence. It's about security and groundedness and resolve and focus. And all of that is stripped away when his genitals are exposed. Yeah. So, and we have a couple slides coming up on the relationship difficulties, but one more on the psychosexual lobotomy. Here's a picture that I pulled off of Facebook from Cutter parents who think it's funny to mock their son after he's been tortured. And they said he's never going to trust us again after being circumcised. Well, that's true. He's going to have feelings of distrust, anger, fear, impulsivity, anxiety, negative emotionality, depression, lack of motivation. These are all real world results that are seen in studies. And it affects them all the way through adulthood. Low self-esteem, relationship difficulties, sexual shame, powerlessness. So this stuff is permanent. And I think people accept that trauma has permanent effects, but whether or not they remember it doesn't matter, because trauma is stored in the body. It's stored in our tissues. It changes our anatomy. It fries the circuits in our brain. It changes our adrenal response. So this is permanent.
I never would have imagined that something like that you couldn't remember as an infant could have such major, long-lasting, lifelong effects. I mean, we know if you experience trauma as an adult, how hard that is to deal with. And we also know that children do not have the ability to process trauma in the same way that adults do. Their brain isn't developed. And so to do this to a child, even if they can't remember it, it's so beyond barbaric.
Right. Yep. So I started studying SRA, satanic ritual abuse, because I figured that surely they couldn't have anything worse than circumcision, or maybe they did circumcisions. And it turns out I was right. And so I was listening to Fiona Barnett's testimony to the International Tribunal, and she had mentioned that she witnessed circumcisions. And in fact, she witnessed MK Ultra projects, subproject 74, the psychological effects of circumcision. Now, Gottlieb destroyed all of the evidence, the MK Ultra evidence, so we'll never know the results, although we have the independent results and studies. But MK Ultra was a program that used torture to force disassociation and to fragment and alter personalities. And Gottlieb recently admitted that they disguised these torture sessions as medical treatments. So they would bring people into hospitals to perform these treatments, but really they were under torture experiments for MK Ultra. And they typically used electroshock therapy. That was their weapon of choice.
Like the Milgram experiments.
Exactly. Yeah, let's talk about the Milgram experiment, because that kind of explains why these doctors and nurses are doing the circumcision. Do you know about the Milgram experiment?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. How, so it was done in, I think it's also known as like the Harvard prison experiment. And basically it was, people were asked to sit in a booth and take orders from a guy in a white coat.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very important that it was an authoritarian type figure. And this person would tell the subject, hit the button and it will electrocute someone on the other side. And they had actors that were supposed to act like they were actually being electrocuted, but they weren't. So the experiment was just to see, will the subject push the button if told to? And I think it was like over 70%, something like that. It was a very high percentage of any old buddy would just follow orders. I was actually reading this in the Fauci book yesterday. And they mentioned that that is exactly the format that was used to get doctors to go along and push the protocols.
Right.
So it could be the exact same premise that gets doctors to go along with the circumcision and not question it.
Right. And what was interesting about the Milgram experiment is that they had the subjects progressively administer the shocks all the way until a lethal dose.
Yep.
So that is really telling about how far people will go to comply with authority.
Right. And if the authority says circumcision is good, then they'll push the button.
Right. And that's why it's used as trauma-based mind control of medical students. So they'll put a medical student into a circumcision chamber and tell them to start cutting on the infants, because they know if they can get a good, willing young person to do something like that to an infant, that they'll do any procedure or protocol in the future.
Right. Yeah. There's a major desensitization process that goes along with surgeons in particular. Right. One that I worked for said she worked, when she went to school, they did a desensitization process. There was a medical school and a veterinary school at the same location, and they shared a cafeteria, and they would have these surgeries playing all the time while they were eating on TV. So they all had to go and eat in the same spot, and they were basically had to see this all the time. Wow. To get desensitized to it. And if you've ever seen a vet do a procedure on a dog or a cat, when they take it away from the owner, it's very similar to the infant being given up by the mother and taken to another room so you can't hear the screams.
Wow. I cannot imagine.
Yeah. Which is why I will never give up my pet and let it go into another room. Whenever they say, oh, we have to take your pet away, I'm like, oh, no, I'm going to watch. I'm going to stand here. I'm going to be watching the whole time.
I agree. Yeah. The castration of dogs and cats is a big gripe of mine, too, but that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, I've been questioning that for quite some time. And this topic really makes me wonder, is it even... like on farms, they can't just let the males procreate because they'll have so many extra animals, they won't be able to manage them.
Right.
And so like humans kind of have to do something But it seems really inhumane to like take like with goats, I know they do this. You can do this at home. You don't need a vet. You can just like put a rubber band around the testicles and they'll just fall off. That sounds horrible to me. And I wouldn't want to be that goat.
Well, there are holistic veterinarians that offer sterilization instead of neutering. So that's a really good option for people. It's like a vasectomy.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm even wondering if that's ethical or moral as well for dogs or cats, because they'll do it at the age of like 6 to 8 weeks. So very, very young.
Right.
And it reduces the sexual hormones.
Right.
So they can't actually turn into adults. So like they're kind of biologically stunted.
Exactly.
And so I'm wondering if we should even be doing that at all to dogs and cats. Maybe we should be practicing abstinence rather than just like, letting them run around and make as many new ones as they like.
Yeah.
But getting back to the disassociation part from the MK Ultra, that part makes so much sense to me. I mean, I haven't experienced anything like that. I know all about trauma bonds, but Kathy O'Brien talks about the more your brain disassociates, and whenever an adult, and I'm sure it's even more so with a child, but whenever an adult is confronted with trauma, the trauma is so much that like you're not emotionally prepared to deal with it. So you have to have some sort of coping mechanism in order to even get through it. And generally that is to go numb or disassociate. And we've all been in school and maybe daydreams that we're somewhere else. But when something really, really, really bad is happening, that is the coping mechanism, like what your brain does. Right. And so it is that disassociation that they were using for MK Ultra mind control experiments. Right. And that's done to half of our population.
Right. It's the original MK Ultra mind control. And that's why it was started by the Desert Death Cults, because they needed to create super soldiers who would go and conquer all of their neighbors to earn their promised land. So when you force someone to disassociate, it alters and fragments their personality and makes them more easily controllable and more easily socially engineered.
Exactly. So, that's what Kathy O'Brien says, that they do it intentionally because that act of disassociation makes it easier for them to implant an idea.
Right. And that's why I like to call circumcision religious derangement syndrome, because it will predispose somebody to create fanatical scriptures their whole life trying to justify what was done to them, instead of facing the possibility that they were harmed by the people that they trusted. So I found a study that actually has the title that circumcision alters adult emotions. And it says early circumcised adult men report lower attachment security, lower emotional stability, higher perceived stress, and higher sensation seeking. But then I read the author's commentary and discovered that the sensation seeking meant a higher sex drive. And the authors even remarked that this would cause a problem for the family structure, because these men who have a higher sex drive are not able to be emotionally stable or emotionally secure with their wives, and it would cause a breakdown of the family structure. And I thought that was so important, because that explains what it's doing to our nation. The most effective way to destroy our nation is to destroy the family structure. And that's what circumcision does.
Well, and look at what's happening over in Europe. They imported a whole bunch of people who are very rape happy. And I've even seen special underwear for women to use in England and France, where they're getting raped all the time if they go outside. And it's special underwear that's like super tight. It's almost like a chastity belt, where it can't be cut off. They had to make, special like clasps and stuff. I don't know how these women are supposed to go to the bathroom, maybe catheterize themselves or something, because you're not going to get that thing off very easy. But the whole reason they're even having to do that has to do probably with the increased sex drive. Like you had a factoid in there about the Netherlands was the only country that marked the status of circumcision in crime.
Right.
And did you say like there's only like 2% or something of the population that is circumcised, and it's 80% of
the rape
of those
right
that rape.
Right. Exactly. Well, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised because they were raped as children or infants. The Muslim culture cuts girls and boys at 7 years old, whereas Jewish and American culture cuts at infancy. So just in my estimation, I would suspect that the emotional and violence problems are even worse for the children cut at 7 years old.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It explains so much.
Yeah, it really does. So it also alters sexual relationships. And this is the part that you were already clued into. But circumcised men and women report difficulty with orgasming, and women report incomplete sexual needs fulfillment and more frequent sexual function difficulties, and painful intercourse. And the painful intercourse is due to friction, because the foreskin is supposed to provide a mobile gliding action. There's supposed to be more lubrication. So this is a very common experience that many couples can attest to. And then also it causes men to have to thrust back and forth a lot more, because not only do they have to overcome friction to move, but they don't have much sensation. So they have to move a lot to feel enough to orgasm. And so the intact male stays much closer and more connected and is a lot more gentle in lovemaking with his woman. So this is a huge destruction of the biological act of love.
Wow. Well, as a female, you might even read in my book in chapter 5, I had a condition that caused pain with sex. And wow, like, so learning about this, I'm like, okay, so they called it a disease, but maybe it wasn't all me. Maybe there was something else going on.
Yeah.
And one of the points that I make too in my book is that so I was facing female castration, and the medical cult, as I call them, they don't even understand female anatomy or the functions of sex. They just know how women make babies. That's about it. They don't really care about like the sexual functions or if a woman is even able to experience pleasure. When I said the surgery that I'm about to go to, one of the complications is you could lose all sexual feeling and function and basically be numb and for the rest of your life. And I was like, well, that doesn't seem like a life that I want to live. And that's not really a risk that I want to take. And I would imagine that they would tell a man about that risk.
Yeah.
But they will not tell a woman about that risk. In fact, I had to get another doctor to tell my surgeon that that was a legit concern. And she had her own research to back it up.
Wow.
But that's how sick and twisted our medical system is. They don't even understand basic sexual anatomy and how it should work. It's just crazy.
Yeah. I've heard it said about the foreskin that doctors are not educated about the foreskin. They only know how to cut it off. Yeah. So,
I'm sure that's true. I wish there was like a wall I could bang my head against right now.
I know, I'm right there with you, but it makes sense because the textbooks, they only show the circumcised penis. So what is there to learn?
Right.
So I thought you'd find this interesting. I was doing some research in the ACEs study, and it's the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study report by the CDC. And it's like a 30-page document. It's really well written. And it's like exactly talking about the harms of circumcision, but they never mention it. They talk about, domestic abuse and stuff that children might be exposed to that could negatively affect them. But then I discovered that our MMR whistleblower, William Thompson, was promoted to oversee this program. So I'm going to be getting in contact with him. And if anybody listening can help me do that, I would appreciate it, because the ACEs study needs to take into account circumcision, because they've done a great job preparing this report. And on the next 2 slides, I can show you how it relates.
Yeah, let's get into it. I did hear that William Thompson is going to be promoted. I didn't even know he was still there. So that's incredible. And I'm happy to hear that news.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like he has a lot of integrity, and I'm glad that he spoke out on the autism harm of the MMR. So, the ACEs report considers the adolescent and infancy years as building blocks of the neurodevelopmental progression. And so that's why they show these building blocks on the bottom here. But they talk about how adverse experiences can totally change the course of somebody's life. They predispose individuals to crime, to violence, drug use, engaging in health risk behaviors, self-destructive tendencies, illness, mental health. And they even say it can be passed down hereditary to their children. So this gives us some insight to how widespread the harm of circumcision can be.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, we kind of got into like the societal effects of it. Actually, here's an interesting visual. You won't be able to see me or you as well when I do this, but this is a map of the male circumcision rate. Because growing up in America, and you make a mention in your documentary that it is the norm to be circumcised in our country, but it's not the norm everywhere else. And
Right.
I was wondering, does that have to do with religion, or is it an individual decision? Because the people that I know that didn't get cut were heavily religious, like Christian religious, like almost cult level kind of Christianity. And those people didn't really stay in their religion because they thought that it was a cult. So they got out. But
Okay.
And then I asked, does it have to do with being religious or not? And the answer that I kept coming up with was no, it doesn't have to do with religion. It's like an individual decision. So I thought, well, let's look around the world and see what decisions other people are making. And I'm noticing that in America, it's a pretty high rate, but it's maybe not as bad as Africa. Oh
Right.
my God, look at that.
Yeah. So there is a difference, though, because in Africa, it's typically done as like tribal initiation ceremonies into like teenage and adulthood years. So it's not done to infants in Africa. But there is some overlap there in the map in the Middle East with the Muslim and the Jewish faiths as well. So yeah, thankfully in America it's going down. It's under 50% now. And as far as the religious thing, the Christian faith in the New Testament is very much against circumcision. I don't think all Christians know that, but there's a couple passages that condemn it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I thought for sure there has to be some sort of connection to the religious ideology, and you cover that a lot in your documentary, which I suggest people go and watch, and at least like keep an open mind, whatever your religion is, because there's so much that I think current history has deliberately kept from us, and so it's good to go back and kind of refresh.
Yeah. I'm really fascinated about the religious and the esoteric motivations. Unfortunately, there's 2 sides to all of this. There's the exoteric, which is like the Bible, and then there's the esoteric, which is like the purposes of circumcision. And it's pretty dark, but it's basically about harvesting power. And the people who are doing this gain a lot of demonic power. It actually gives them erotic highs. And all blood sacrifices are satanic, demonic, whatever you want to call it. The exoteric excuse is that these things provide redemption for sins. But the esoteric hidden purpose is all about summoning and harvesting power.
Yeah, and you describe it as a blood ritual. We even talked about a little bit on the Unjected show, how it's a moil that comes and actually, like we're talking about on the Unjected show, that it would be considered child pornography and pedophilia right now.
Mm-hmm.
For if we were looking at that procedure, how we would look at anything else.
Right.
It is a full-grown adult male who puts his mouth to the cut infant to suck the blood off of it. And then they all drink the blood as a blood ritual. How is that not satanic and abusive? I mean,
right. Exactly. Yeah. I'm not a huge advocate on religious freedom. I propose religious reform. I want the bad stuff cut out. I want the churches to pay their taxes. I want all of the religious and tribal people out of positions of authority, because let's take medicine, for example, and look at how their bias has created such problems with circumcision. You know, they brought in their blood ritual and disguise it as a medical procedure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I had a couple more questions, and it's mostly just like, what would you tell a mother who is pregnant and thinking about delivering in a hospital, or maybe not? What would you tell them about the circumcision procedure?
Well, I would suggest they check out Your Whole Baby. It's a wonderful outreach, and they have a website, and they provide a lot of great benefits to staying whole and intact and welcoming your baby with love. They do get into some of the negatives and the harms of circumcision, which is important, but framing the message in an encouraging and empowering way is very important for new mothers. Because if we only tell them the harms of circumcision, it's naturally kind of repulsive, you know? So I like how Your Whole Baby approaches it with a loving welcome and educates them on the benefits of being whole and intact.
And what would you tell the mothers who didn't know about this, who may have circumcised their own sons? Because I do know some of those mothers now. And one of them said she cried for an entire day when she learned about this. So I know even like families that have vaccinated their children and then have to deal with the guilt. I mean, the guilt of that has to be very similar. So what do you tell those people to help them cope?
Well, I think most parents want the best for their sons, and they did the best with the information they had. They did fail in protecting their children, but I do have some sympathy for the parents. I've gone through the forgiveness process with my parents too. It's difficult, but it's a lot better than an alternative. And the sooner that we all can address this with honesty and openness and compassion for each other, the sooner that we can end this practice of forced genital cutting.
Yeah. I know from my own life that when you personally make a mistake that has grave consequences, it is very hard to stop blaming yourself. In fact, almost everybody, in order to avoid the pain of dealing with that, would rather disassociate or avoid. Me, however, I dealt with it face on or head on, and it's very difficult to forgive yourself. But what I continue to go back to is you can't hold yourself accountable for what you didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've been tricked, you know, the medical authorities have tricked us. And It's a cultural amnesia, and I was under amnesia for 30 some years, and I'm trying to help people wake up, and I also have a outreach for men to help them with foreskin restoration. And I have an ebook that I wrote, and it has a bunch of different methods, techniques, devices, and it's a really good guide for people to get started with this to help heal.
Yeah, my next and last question was going to be, what would you tell to other men who were cut at birth, to help get us past like the stigma of the whole rumor of the cleanliness and like the social norm? How do you help them get past like the default to relying on those and being stuck in the I'm fine place? What do you tell them?
Well, I would say if you think you're fine, then that's great, and I believe you. But you should have been great. You should have been exceptional, and they took that from you. And so all I ask is that you extend the courtesy of keeping your sons whole. Keep them intact. Let them stay natural and normal. And if you don't want to face your circumcision harm, then you don't have to. But if you choose to do foreskin restoration, in most cases, you're going to have a lot of benefits. You're going to get some of that functionality back, glands protection, that sense of wholeness. It's really, really helped me. I'm still helping people for free. I don't have a lot of people reaching out yet, but I do help people with this. I think there's 250,000 people actively restoring right now. But I haven't found any coaches or guides or books out there. So that's where I'm starting, and that's what I'm trying to do now.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably an incredible amount of misinformation. So thank you so much for going down the rabbit hole and creating all these resources for people so we can educate ourselves and hopefully turn things around. Because I know I don't want to see America turn into the situation going on in Europe. And it seems like this is pretty relevant to that.
Yeah, thank you. I think things are changing. There's 4 states currently that have constitutional challenges against the FGM laws. And most likely what will happen is the FGM laws will be struck down and ruled unconstitutional because they don't have equal protection for boys. And then the FGM and the intactivists will join together and say, let's create a law of no genital cutting for both genders.
That would be great.
Yeah. So that's the path we're headed. And it's a very exciting time to be part of the change.
Right on. Well, thank you so much for being here and for having this conversation. It's very taboo. It's difficult to have, but you did an excellent job. And I hope that the message reaches as many people as possible. If you know anyone who is maybe looking to have a baby, or maybe is pregnant right now, or they want to become parents, please share this information with them, because before is the time, not after. Not that it's not good to know after, but you can't change at that point. So definitely please help us get the information out so we can educate more people, and because that's the only way we change things. Knowledge is power.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Zoe. Really enjoyed talking to you, and thanks for all the hard work you do and getting the truth out.
Thanks. And I will have links so that people can find you, Jeff, and all your references as well when this podcast goes out. So if you want more information, check the links and they'll be there for you. And also check out the documentary if you want more information. I thought it was incredible. And parts of it were hard to watch, but again, it's really incredible and necessary information. So I highly recommend people go and check that out. It will be on my channel, so there's no age checks. Jeff has one on YouTube. If you want to watch it, there will be a link for that as well. But if you want to watch it without the age checks for my friends down under and in the UK, we'll make that happen. So without further ado, you were meant to be free, but you got to claim it.
Like 17 years ago when I was in nursing school, and I saw infants circumcised during my OB rotation. This was in the late 90s, and I saw 2 infants who were strapped down in circumstraints. That was the first thing that shocked me. Well, actually, the first thing that shocked me is that these parents would relinquish their children, which I'm sure they still do today. They would relinquish their children to have this procedure done without any question. The children were brought into the room by themselves with the doctors, and the children are given little to no anesthetic. The anesthetic that they're given is an injection in the head of their penis. Medication sit for a while. It's also not supposed to be given to children, especially newborns. I saw that they had to actually rip the foreskin off of the head of the penis with an instrument. And of course, the baby is crying the whole time in excruciating pain. And I saw 2 infants side by side being done at the same time, like assembly line fashion. And one of the infants was done by a medical student. So the medical student took probably 3 to 4 times longer than the seasoned pediatrician who was doing the other infant. And I could see that the med student was about to probably pass out. He was going really white in the face from having to do this to an infant. And I thought to myself, would these parents knowingly relinquish their child to a med student, knowing that this guy had never done it before, knowing that they're giving up their precious son to somebody to cut like that when he's never even done a procedure like that? So I think people have no idea what they're agreeing to when they agree to something like this. I mean, they willingly don't even go into the room knowing it's going to cause pain. They know that, but yet they still do it. And they think it'll take care of all sorts of problems for their son. And a little Vaseline is going to take care of everything afterwards. But horrific. I made the decision after that no child of mine would go through that. I now have a almost 3-year-old little boy. He's beautiful, and I wouldn't change anything.